Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by the wonderful filmmaker Nisha Pahuja to talk all about her latest documentary, To Kill a Tiger. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the genesis of how this story came together, because I love the fact that initially you were kind of filming a couple of different strands of the story before it became this really centralized story and this very intimate portrayal of a family, and in particular a father fighting for his daughter and for justice in a small village in India following a really horrific sexual assault that happened to her at the age of 13. And so I just wanted to ask about the initial journey of kind of filming more than even just that story, because there's so much footage that you filmed with that family over the course of 3 years. And so I was really fascinated by just like the different strands of filmmaking that you were going through during the production journey.
Yeah, it was so epic actually. So initially the film was a film on masculinity, and I was following the work of Mahindraji, who's one of the activists in the film. And Mahindraji was running a program for men and boys in about 30 villages across the state of Jharkhand. And Ranjit, the father, was in one of these programs, and the focus of the program was masculinity and giving men and boys a different way of being male. So I was actually following his work, following this extraordinary story of these two young boys. I mean, they're so powerful. And then the story of Ranjit and what was happening to his family after his daughter was sexually assaulted. And, at the time I was thinking I could sort of, braid these storylines together, and I would have this sort of treatise, this treatise on masculinity. And we got into the edit room, and it was just sort of years of kind of banging our head against the wall, and a few editors finally coming in, friends of ours, saying, you guys have two different films here, and you need to just sort of focus on the one. So that's how we ended up just making To Kill a Tiger.
I was also really interested in just your journey and your process of developing the relationship that you did with Ranjit, with his daughter, and with the whole family, because it feels very intimate in terms of the conversations that you're having, and it's very much about kind of coming into their spaces, into their home, into the fields that he's working in, and spaces that they feel very naturally comfortable in. And so I was just interested in how that relationship really developed to such a space of trust that's so clear in the filmmaking.
Yeah. It took a really long time, and it wasn't instant, and there was so many reasons for that, right? Like just the fact that I'm obviously my background is South Asian, but I'm from Canada. I'm a different caste, a different class, education, so many things that were sort of that separate us on the surface. And so it took some time. I would say probably about 4 months before the family really kind of opened up, and it became a very intimate kind of process. And there was a bond and a real friendship there, a genuine kind of friendship. It took a long time, and I have to be honest. I don't know. There was a moment where I thought, oh, this isn't going to happen. It's not going to come together. And as a filmmaker, I think I am very much about sort of story and character. I'm really drawn to people, so and I do tend to create very intimate sort of spaces and relationships with people. So I was really feeling like out of my element. I was thinking, oh, this isn't going to happen here. It's not going to happen, but it did. And I think part of it was just uh, part of it was just we just kept going back. We just kept going until they were comfortable. They were comfortable with us. And I think the other part was also just, I think it's also about, how you reveal of yourself. Process isn't just that you're taking from your subjects, but you're actually giving of yourself in return. So, they feel more compelled to share with you if you're also allow yourself to be vulnerable.
It also sounds like from the way that you've spoken about the film already previously, that it wasn't just a case of saying, is it okay if we come in and film your story, that it was kind of a continued
Mhm.
conversation throughout the journey of filmmaking, so that it
Yeah.
was always a conscious choice on their effort to continue showing up for filming, that going through the court system was always for them and never for the sake of the film. And so what did that look like in terms of just that kind of continued consent, and why was that something that felt so important, especially for this story to you?
Yeah. Definitely two reasons. I mean, one, the vulnerability of the family, so it was it was so clear at so many different moments, some that you don't even see in the film, right? But it was just so clear at so many different moments that we had to continue asking permission, and we had to make sure that they were okay and that they weren't doing this for the camera. They weren't feeling compelled to do what they were doing because of the NGO even, right? Like, don't feel pressure. If you want to drop the case, we'll support that as well. Whatever you need from us, we're here for you. It was just important, like just ethically, it felt that I had to keep making sure that they were doing it for themselves and for no other reason. And then the second was obviously the fact that we were filming the story. We wanted to make sure that we wanted to make sure that we weren't having an effect on the outcome, of the case itself, right? Like, we were very aware of the fact that their story, their case was being taken a lot more seriously than it would have been had we not been filming the story. So we were constantly checking with the family, and we were also checking with the public prosecutor, the activists, the defense lawyer. Like, are we having, what is the impact that we're having on the larger reality here? It was something that we were conscious of, and it was something that we wanted to mitigate, and also address in an open and honest way. And, because the truth is, as all documentary filmmakers, when we go into these spaces, we affect reality, we impact reality. We aren't without consequence, right? And for me, I felt with this particular film, because it was so complicated, because it was so sensitive, being aware and speaking to people honestly, on camera, off camera, about that was really, really important. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And, with the central crux of this story being so much about a father and his daughter, with his daughter and filming with her, the initial plan was to not reveal her face and to not reveal her identity in the film. And yet I think there's something really beautiful about the fact that you still filmed with her fully in frame throughout, with the idea being we'll conceal it in post-production. Maybe it'll be animation, maybe it'll be another actor kind of stepping in and we'll obscure it a little bit. Why was that such an important facet to you, to make sure that she was still kind of front and center in the frame, even at a point where you were planning to obscure that in post-production?
Yeah, for sure. Because I didn't want to add to her sense of shame. I didn't want to add to her sense of feeling like she had something to hide, or, feeling guilty. So, the idea of getting her to cover her face, right? Which we could have easily done. We could have easily gotten her to wear like a scarf, right? I could have easily, like in post, just added like this sort of like black band or something. But it felt like I did not want to be part of the problem. I didn't want to be adding to, all the noises outside of her that were somehow making her feel like she had something to hide and that she'd done something wrong. So, there was that emotional part of it. Then there was also just the very practical aspect of, like, how do you make a verite documentary by, obscuring somebody and filming just kind of parts of her. Like, because initially on our first shoot, I think that's what we did. We just thought, okay, we'll just film her from behind, because she was also going to be a very small part of the film initially. So we thought, okay, we'll just start filming her from behind, or we'll just film her ribbons, or just something kind of more abstract. It evolved, and very quickly it evolved, because it didn't feel right. It didn't feel good. And then once we got into the post and she became a bigger part of the story, it became even more complicated, this idea of obscuring her. That even though we did, as you say, we tried some really interesting things, including getting an actress to play her, like literally doing a deep fake, and that was fascinating. And you know it would have been effective had we chosen to do that. But we were doing test screenings at the same time with audiences to see how they were feeling, if there were sensitivities that we weren't addressing. And without, to a person, everyone said, don't hide her. Don't hide her. It's so powerful to experience her courage. It's so powerful. and luckily for us, it took so long to make this film that by the time we were ready, she could give us permission, and in the end, that's what she did. So yeah.
Right. And I think that's so beautiful that again, it goes back to that kind of like constantly getting consent for every step of the filmmaking process, because she
Yes.
turned 18 during the time that you were in post-production. And so
Yeah.
what was that conversation, or what was that moment where she saw some of the footage and kind of said, I want to be in the film. I want people to be able to
Oh,
see the identity.
it was so powerful. I mean, that was like, I'll never forget that moment. Actually, it was so powerful. Two moments I will never forget. One when I zoomed with the family after they'd seen the film. My sound recordist had gone to their city and had shown it to them, and then I zoomed them when it was over, and it was just the look on their faces, right? Just this feeling of peace and um, light. Like they were all just kind of glowing, right? They'd all been kind of it's like they had been vindicated, and somebody had heard them and put them out into the world as they wanted to be represented. So I think that was a very powerful experience for them. And then the other time was we actually took the father and the daughter, Ranjit and Kieran, to London for screenings in the UK, and that was so extraordinary because the audience didn't know that they were going to be there. I didn't want to advertise them, like I didn't want to use a rape survivor to sell tickets or to come to the movie or whatever. So we were very private about it. We didn't say that she was going to be there or he was going to be there. And the moment, the way the audience just erupted into applause and standing ovations when they saw them, it was so moving. It was really powerful experience. So I'm so glad we were able to give them that. Yeah.
It's also really lovely to kind of with what we see of her in the film, that it's very much about who she is as a person. It's not allowing this one moment to define who she is. And part of that feels like it comes from the fact that you made a very specific choice not to ask her about the night of the assault itself.
Mhm.
What made you realize that that was an important delineation in the conversations that you were going to have with her while filming?
Um, well, I'm not an expert, right? I'm not a therapist. I thought I have no right to do this. I mean, as it was, I was so uh, conscious of the fact that I was filming a survivor and a child survivor. I filmed, obviously, as doc filmmakers, we film sensitive material all the time, but this was so sensitive. And I'll never forget the first time I filmed with her. Actually, I couldn't. And then my crew, we had to film something else. We were filming the group of village women, um, that scene, and I couldn't go. Like I just needed to kind of be around her and to kind of hug her and to I got my crew to go, right, but I couldn't. It just felt strange. Um, so I didn't. For me, it was a no brainer. Like I have no idea how to speak to an assault survivor. I wouldn't know the first thing about what to say, or how to ask, and it wasn't my place. So I just never went there. Never went there. And I've gone there with her since, as we've become really close, right? I'm in touch with her all the time. And we've talked about it, we've talked a little bit about it, but yeah, it was never a question, never a question. And actually, even that main interview that you see in the film, that was done after the trial, right? It was actually done afterwards. It wasn't. I never interviewed her uh, while uh, while this was going on because I didn't want to add to her trauma. I think I talked to her a little bit like in situ just to make her feel comfortable, but the master interview was done after the case was over.
And with that master interview that you did with her as well, I've heard you mention that actually you had the rest of your crew leave partway through that conversation, which I also thought was very lovely and also just very telling of the relationship that the two of you had built up over time. And so, what made you make that particular choice of, I feel like actually this should just be the two of us in the room right now?
Yeah, it was purely instinct. It was just purely something. it was like, um, you know this as an interviewer, right? There's a moment in the interview where something shifts, and there's a wall that goes, and you are just so in with that person's humanity. It's like a soul connection, right? It's very powerful and it's palpable. You can feel it. And that's what happened in that moment. And it's happened to me a few times in interviews. And with her, I really felt it very strongly. I was so nervous about that interview, I have to tell you. And I felt it in that moment. And at that moment, I realized she needs to really talk. She really needs to unburden. She needs to she just needs to express. And so it became very clear to me that that was her need. And so I just very gently just kind of said, okay, like, well, do you guys mind just leaving us? And it was really, really, really powerful, beautiful interview. I have to say, where, you know, I really felt her. So yeah, it was a gift. Yeah.
And with filming with her dad, I love the fact that it's not just the conversations that he's having with you on camera. There's so many just observational moments throughout the film, getting to see him working with the land,
Yes.
getting to see him sitting there. What does it look like when he's riding to court in the car with his daughter? And just all these kind of very quiet, introspective moments that actually tell us just as much about the experience.
Yeah.
And just like some of the isolation that we see him experiencing as well. And so how did you make sure that you were capturing that as much as you were kind of asking him questions and kind of finding where to step in and where to kind of really pull back with him?
Yeah, I mean, that's also a process, right? Like, you start to film someone and you look at the material. And with Ranjit, what was so clear to me is that his face was really expressive. Like, everything that he was experiencing, he didn't, he never really articulated things. I mean, the only time he really exploded and talked about the pressure was in that moment where he's talking about his drinking, right? But overall, he just, um, it's like he bottled things up. He didn't say anything, and but his face revealed everything. His face was just, it was so telling. He just had that kind of a face. Both parents did. And so for me, it became a very conscious decision to make sure that when we edited the film, that we would focus on that. That would be one of our kind of guiding sort of principles, right? It's just this man and this sort of quiet strength and the emotions that were playing on his face. And also, I have to say, um, uh, part of why it's so effective is because I work with a really amazing team of people. I work with a great crew, and my cameraman is my husband, and he's so good. And he's also like, I remember saying to him at one point, saying, okay, I know there's going to be a tremendous amount of tension in the car with Ranjit and the ward member going to court, right? It was so clear that it was going to be tense. And I said, what should we do? How do we capture this? And he said, close-ups, like, we'll just be sort of tight, right? So it's also just working with people who really know visual language and what to do. And then my editor, Mike Munn, is so brilliant, and he comes from, he's done features and drama as well as doc, so he really has an incredible sense of character and sense of story. So it's a lot of I think the power of the film also comes from the other people behind it, right? The team behind it.
That's really wonderful. And as much as it's about building those relationships with this family and filming with them, the conversations with their community and with people from their village are also incredibly interesting to listen to. And I feel like you've done a great job in making it a very non-judgmental space for them. It may not be opinions that everybody in the audience agrees with, but we understand the sense of community and culture and kind of why those perspectives exist. And so how did you set about making that space for them as much as you're making space for the family to tell their truths?
No, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. How did I do that, and why did I do that? I think I think I just did it because I have, I have spent so much time in India, like, so much time, big chunks of time in India. My husband is from India. Um, and I think, you learn, right? India is such an incredible teacher. It really teaches you humility. It teaches you complexity. It teaches you that you have to be non-judgmental, because if you start to judge, you will lose your mind, right? Like, it is such a difficult country on so many levels. And so it's always forcing you to go deeper, dig deeper, ask more questions, ask different questions, ask questions that you've not thought about before, ask questions that aren't about black and white, because nothing is black and white, period. Like, I do think that in the West, our cultures are uh, binary. We're logical. Our cultures are rational. India is not a rational country. It operates on emotion, right? And I think, so it forces you to ask a different kind of question. And it also operates on so many different levels, just in terms of past, present, and future, right? Like, it's a country that exists in all of those time zones. And so when you look at it that way, of course it makes perfect sense that you go into a village like that, and people are going to be thinking that this system is absolutely correct. Of course you should marry her to one of her rapists. It makes perfect sense. And why wouldn't it? Right? Of course it makes perfect sense, because that's their reality, that's their experience, that's the culture, that they're living in. And so when you realize that, there is no, the right or wrong becomes a different kind of right or wrong, and it becomes about one of ethics and kind of a larger, a deeper morality. You know what I mean? As in kind of a human rights morality, right? So, but to get people to understand that, you can't judge them also, right? So, yeah.
I also feel like with those conversations as well, and a lot of the dialogue that the film creates, it is this one specific story in a specific community in a small town in India. And at the same time, there are a lot of viewpoints represented that also exist in Western culture and a lot of other countries culturally. And so it, in turn, by being a very specific story, tells a very broad story of society and how we
Yeah.
respond to these situations and the conversations that people have, opinions that are created. And was that something that you were very conscious of along the way, especially kind of going back to what you were talking about at the beginning with the initial idea of the film that you were planning to tell before you narrowed it down?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I started, Me Too was, or it wasn't when I started. I mean, when I really started was sort of after the Delhi gang rape in 2012. But shortly after that, Me Too erupted. And so it was so clear to me that these issues that I had been reading about in India they were just global. They were universal. And what we really had to understand was masculinity, right? The issue, the crux of the problem is patriarchy. It's the system that all of us operate under, right? It's a construct that all of us operate under, that it fundamentally imprisons all of us, right? I mean, that's what constructs, by their very nature, that's what they do. So, so yes, and I think at one point, especially when we kind of shifted gears in the edit, like, what was so clear to me as I was filming Ranjit's story is this was a hero's journey, right? This was a man who had a goal, and there were obstacles along the path, and those obstacles were both internal and external, right? He was going to be, he had to deal with his own insecurities, his own vulnerabilities as a man from a particular community. And he was also going to have to deal with the larger cultural and legal system that was standing in the way. It's a hero's journey, and it's kind of a David and Goliath story. And those are always universal. And then at the heart of it is love, right? Is what's motivating this man, is what motivates all of us as human beings, right? Is love of family. We will do anything for our family. So, it was so clear that there would be kind of these global resonances.
I also
Yeah.
wanted to ask about part of the experience that you had in filming this, which is the moment where some of the people in the village were a little bit inebriated and tensions just start to really escalate. And my understanding is that was pretty far into the process of filming. And so there's been kind of like gradual building tension. And that was something that you and your crew had discussed, you know, if there's a moment where it feels like we're in danger, it feels like things don't feel safe, at what point do we consider turning the camera off? And the initial conversation that it sounds like you'd had together was we would turn the camera off, but we would keep the audio recording. And actually, eventually there is a point where you also turned the audio recording off. And so what was it kind of going on that we don't see in the film that prompted that decision of, you know, we really need to just turn the camera off. This isn't about the film. This is just about the conversations that we're having right now in person.
You've really done your homework, huh? I'm so blown away. Thank you for that. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, you know, it's like when you're a filmmaker, right? When you're a documentary filmmaker, the story is the most important thing. You're always like, okay, whatever it takes to tell the story, you know. But that changes, right? As you go through the process and things happen and things unfold and you're in something for a long period of time. And in this particular instance, you know, we'd been going to the village for a while, and it was clear that sort of tension, you know, it's clear that tension was building. And as the case was continuing, it was building, you know, and the family wasn't going to back down. It was getting more and more tense. And so, you know, and I had it very much tried to mitigate that, and I had tried, you know, with a lot of kind of intensity, you know, to sort of ensure that that didn't happen, that there wasn't an explosion, and that you know, that the villagers also felt that they could talk to me and could share their version of things, that I was open to that. But it didn't happen that way. And so when, you know, when that moment in the film actually arrives, we were completely not prepared for it. You know, even though we'd been talking about it, even though we were aware that it could happen, when it actually happens, when it actually strikes, you know, like, oh my God, there's this impending violence. You know, you're kind of you're in shock. Like I was definitely in shock, but I was also really calm, as were my crew, right? We were all very, very calm. And you don't see it in the film, but, you know, we do go in and out and we try to kind of calm people down. And eventually what happened to me was this feeling of, my goodness, like, what have I done? You know, like, what have I done here? Like, I felt it was not so much fear, although I did feel fear, but the overall feeling in that moment was shame. I felt shame. I felt like I had kind of upset an ecosystem, right? And those communities, that's what they are. It's an ecosystem. And rightly or wrongly, it's an ecosystem that functions. And I went in and I shook up that ecosystem, which needed to be shaken up. It, you know, it needs that, right? What I was doing ultimately was shedding light on something that's wrong. But I was very aware of the impact that it was having, and I felt awful about it. So because of that feeling of like, oh my God, everything else went away, like the film went away, you know, getting the material, all of that was it just went out the door, right? It was just, we need to just step back, shut everything down, apologize profusely to these people, and have a conversation with this community, you know? And so that's what we did. We just shut everything down, went outside, calmed people down, and it sort of went in waves, right? We calmed everyone down, and then the men started coming, and then it erupted again, and then we calmed them down and erupted again. And finally the women said, you need to leave. And they kind of, you know, they guided us to our car. So yeah. And my husband was so furious. He's just like, oh, thank you. You really have to pay me more.
It's been so fascinating to hear everything about making of this film. It's a really, really wonderfully told story, and I'm so glad that it's a story that we get the chance to see on screen. So congratulations on everything,
Thank
Nisha.
you. Thank you. I mean, it was so wonderful to speak to you. It really was. Can I just add one last thing? And it had to do with it had to do with your question about, the villagers and that experience and what it was like. And I think I I think it's from, it really felt like to me it was the first time, as a filmmaker where um actually it's not true. I've had to deal with it before, but it was this was a really hard film to make. It was a really, really challenging film to make on so many levels, And I would say that um, the 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 ethics of it and the navigating that stuff, um, was really, really challenging. And I think, um, in some sense, in a way, probably the most powerful part of making this film, you know, because it forces you to confront a lot of things. It forces you to ask questions in terms of access, responsibility, um, what to include, what not to include, it really makes you think about what you're doing and the power of the power that you have when you wield a camera. So yeah.
I really, really love that. And, especially how thoughtful it feels like you've been throughout the entire filmmaking process. So thank you so much for sharing all of this. And
Yeah.
thanks again
Thank
for
you.
the conversation.